Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online, Navigant Credit Union, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, Newport Film, and Half Street Group.
Bartholomew Town.
You know, I got a great education at the University of Rhode Island. It's something that I use every day in all of my work. And now the University of Rhode Island, if you haven't heard, they're offering a wide array of programs online. That's right, URI Online. Check it out at uri.edu/online or give them a call, 401-874-5280. I can't thank the University of Rhode Island enough for the outstanding education that they provided me. They're one of the best universities in the Northeast, public or otherwise. Give them a call, 401-874-5280. That's 401-874-5280, and learn about the University of Rhode Island online. You want to talk about longevity? Take a look at Navigant Credit Union. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. That's right. Today, Navigant's a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. It is the 2024 Year in Review episode, the biggest stories that really are Rhode Island or Rhode Island adjacent. It's something we've done every year, and it's typically the time of our lives here as we look back on how we've spent the last year. And we have quite a panel today. The Providence Journal's Antonia Farzan and Dan McGowan, columnist at the Boston Globe. Thank you so much for your time. And here we are at the end of the year. Congratulations. We made it.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Good to be
exactly.
here.
We didn't make it's not done yet, Bill, as we record right now.
That's true. That's true. So, look, I mean, the major stories are, we can certainly get into some of the more interesting sub rosa type of stuff, but there are obviously a few that jump out. Of course, the cyber attack that's unfolding right now. And I think let's start there because it's so current. We're recording this on December 16th. It's possible that you're hearing this right now, maybe for the first time weeks later, based on the nature of how we've kind of programmed it. But in any case, as of right now, this cyber attack, to me, it's definitely a major story. It remains to be seen how major a story it becomes. And I think the big thing that we're looking for right now is, do people's benefits get disrupted when we hit January, number one? Number two, are we actually going to see people whose data may have been compromised impacted either with their accounts or with credit? We'll start with Antonia, your initial take on the cyber attack and just kind of where it fits into the broader Rhode Island 2024 story.
Yeah, I mean, it feels almost to me like the way we felt last year this time talking about the Washington Bridge, where the news had just come out. It was obviously one of the biggest stories of the year, but we didn't really know yet. And obviously something that's going to be very big in the coming year, but we didn't really know yet how big or to what extent or how exactly it was going to affect people, only that it was bad. And this feels like that, but even more to extreme, because you can only kind of speculate about what the potential consequences are. You know, are you talking about people going to buy groceries for their family for Christmas and their card doesn't work and they have no idea why? So that's definitely something I'll be watching really closely in the coming weeks, coming year. And like you said, I mean, wondering how it's hard to know if people have some kind of identity fraud. Did it come from this? Because there are so many breaches every day that I think it's also going to be really hard to quantify. Unlike the bridge where you can see, all right, it took me this long to cross. This, it might be actually really hard to tell in some cases what the impact is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Something that came up at the first briefing, which I was at on Friday night on this thing, it came towards the end. It was actually the last question asked. Dan, I wonder your thoughts on this. A reporter for ABC6 asked, you know, hey, given that it's the 1 year anniversary, hereabouts, the 1 year anniversary of the Washington Bridge, and now you've got this, Governor McKee, what does this say about your leadership? And I thought that was an unfair question and really just a sensationalized question, because at this point, it's hard to see how this falls on the shoulders of the administration. However, it certainly falls on the shoulders of the administration in terms of the response going forward, both on a protections side for people's accounts and getting information out about that, and also is there going to be a parallel system, an analog system in place for people to receive their benefits? But I wonder your take on looking at this through the lens of, is this something that can be compared to the Washington Bridge, or anything that McKee at this point in time, as of taping, people should be looking at it like, hey, here's a failure of government?
No, I mean, I feel for the governor on this one, because it's, look, you're in charge, and so it ultimately falls on you to like you said, prepare the response correctly, and hopefully, hopefully there's as little disruption as possible. But this is not something that the governor necessarily could help. I know there's the argument around maybe you could have, an internal system. You really think that then it would be the Rhode Island government's fault if they were running this kind of thing? I'm not sure I trust the Rhode Island government more than I trust, a big company like Deloitte, although it is easy right now to raise questions about Deloitte. So, no, I don't think so. I will take a slight issue with the idea that a question is unfair. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. You're hoping to get an answer, that, maybe the governor admits that, look, I know it's been a tough year for the confidence of Rhode Island, for the confidence in government. That's a great story if he says something like that. So I think it's reasonable to ask the question, but I don't think it's reasonable to sort of frame the entire argument around this as a lapse in the McKee administration. But to your point, now going forward, they have to make sure that people's benefits aren't impacted. They have to, as best as possible, make sure that people aren't, that people's system or people's information has been compromised, that we find a way to, get them the support they need in that kind of thing. So it's all about the going forward. Whereas, when with the bridge, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that, there was two elements, right? There was the, how are you going to make things better going forward? And then there was also the revisit of the past of how did this happen? And I think we're still going through that conversation.
No doubt about it. And let's go right there. Right now, the Washington Bridge debacle. This is something that has been, it's easy to frame it in a vacuum as something happening in this moment, but I think this is obviously going to be something that impacts the election in 2026, and it may very well be the story of the decade. Obviously, COVID would certainly be the story of the decade, at least tied for story of the decade. But what we've seen over the last year has been, I framed it time and time again as one of the most shockingly poor communications efforts that you could possibly have in terms of getting information out to the public and sort of almost just delivering empathy. Antonia, from your seat as a reporter, how do you rank both the situation with the bridge and also the response to the bridge? Do they work in tandem? Is one a separate story from the other? How do you frame that out?
Yeah, I think it is definitely part of the same story, because part of people's frustration has been feeling like not only has there not necessarily been communication at certain times about what's going on and who's responsible, but also I think early on when the governor was downplaying how much this was affecting people when he was not personally affected by it, I think that's something that people are not going to let go for a long time. And so it's been interesting now with the cyber hack to see how they seem to maybe be learning some communications lessons just on a very meta level. I mean, on one hand, no, I do not appreciate the fact they wait until Friday at 7:30 p.m. to tell everyone. I think they certainly could have done that earlier, and you did not have to spend your weekend doing this, Bill. But the fact that they were having press conferences every day of the weekend saying, all right, this is what we know, this is what we've learned, having the governor out front, because you remember that was a big part of the criticism with the bridge, was that he was not out front in the beginning. It was Alviti. So it definitely seems like maybe they're kind of quietly acknowledging that was not handled as well as it could have been and trying to do a little better with this. Yeah,
and Dan, you were one of the loudest voices in terms of bringing that criticism on of Governor McKee from the initial response. We think back to at the end of 2023 and that first press conference where, they spun a fairy tale of, maybe a heavy truck went over the bridge and just randomly, hey, this thing was just inspected in July and wow, maybe something catastrophic just happened and don't worry about it. We'll get it under control. And I talked to the governor. This is Alviti speaking. I talked to the governor. We're all good. And that sort of downplay was really, at the time, even if this didn't materialize into the level of story with the demolition and everything that we've seen this year, at that moment in time, it just seemed like, wow, there is hardly a story or hardly a scenario that you should be out in front of more than an infrastructure failure. And it just didn't seem to happen. You were very critical of that, Dan.
Bartholomew Town.
Birds are disappearing from our landscape at a rapid pace. Over 1/3 of those breeding on Audubon Society of Rhode Island's wildlife refuges are in decline. Climate change has taken a toll on their migration, nesting, and food sources. While science is highlighting the problem, Audubon is working on real solutions with a plan to rapidly reduce their carbon emissions. The organization will be free of fossil fuels by 2030, with renewable energy powering Audubon's buildings, equipment, and vehicles. To shape our future, all of us must act. Learn more about repowering Audubon, their avian research, and how you can join their fight for climate resiliency. Visit asri.org/repower. Newport Film screens the latest, critically acclaimed documentary films year-round across Rhode Island. Like a film festival, Newport Film often gets early access to films before they're available online or in the theaters. Stay up to date on their latest screening events at newportfilm.com or on Instagram at newportfilm. Are you looking to advance in your career or explore a new field? The University of Rhode Island now offers a comprehensive portfolio of fully online programs designed to bring world-class education to you anytime, anywhere. Choose from a wide range of flexible, asynchronous programs in business and leadership, data, tech, and STEM, healthcare and pharmacy, marine and environmental science, and more. With expert faculty and innovative courses, you'll gain the skills and knowledge to thrive in today's competitive world. Are you ready to take the next step? Visit uri.edu/online and discover how URI Online can help you achieve your goals. URI Online, learn anywhere with us. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communication, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org.
Yeah, I mean, look, the governor and I think the administration broadly has bungled this every single way they possibly could post figuring out that they had a bridge problem. I'll give them the credit, at least I'll give Governor McKee the credit that prior to December 11th, 2023, with the exception of the couple of years that he was in office, that maybe something could have been spotted. This is very clearly, as you have been talking about, and as the Journal has written really extensively about, clearly this is a problem that has gone back, multiple administrations and in many years. So, give the governor a pass on it's possible the bridge was was going to fail. Certainly the bridge was going to fail no matter who the governor was, whether it was Helena Folks or Ashley Kalis or in this case, Dan McGowan. But going forward, I think they really destroyed the confidence of Rhode Islanders in government. And as we've seen all over the country, it's not unique to Rhode Island. Confidence in government is at a kind of an all-time low at this point. They contributed to that, whether it was initially the governor not being around for the first press conference, telling us it was going to take 3 weeks, ends up, now it's going to be potentially many years, not being able to find a bidder, the demolition being halted. I mean, this has just been constantly, like a constant drumbeat where I think the administration does need to take some ownership of it, and I think it's going to haunt him, as he heads into re-election in 2026.
The question remains, as we sort of wrap up the 2024 aspect of this story, how much does the general public know about the day-to-day scenarios that play out with this thing versus just saying, hey, you know what, the bridge broke and McKee was governor? That most people have no idea who Peter Alviti is, despite the fact that he goes on the radio once a week and answers calls about broken stop signs and things like that. The vast majority of Rhode Islanders probably don't know who he is. They don't really care about anything other than the fact that the story, the headline is the Washington Bridge is broken. I guess for each of you, Antonia, starting with you, when you look at this story over the course of the year, this past year, is there any one specific element that jumps out that you think may have reached the broader audience, the outside of the political class, outside of the real deep news consumer, that paints a little bit more detail in this story? Or do you think that it's just as simple as people know that the Washington Bridge is broken and believe, hey, McKee was governor, and it's as simple as that?
Yeah, I think you're right that definitely people know McKee as governor. They do not necessarily know the name Peter Alviti. And I think part of this also, the fact that no one has been fired and no one has essentially had the blame pinned on them, means that people are going to look at the governor as the person to blame, right? If you let's say hypothetically you fire Peter Alviti, whether that's fair or not, and whether this perception is fair or not, people are going to say, oh, okay, that's the guy who messed everything up, right? And that's the scapegoat, essentially. So we have not had that. So I think people do want someone to hold accountable. And McKee is the most obvious person for that for a lot of people. And I do think also those comments, I can't remember exactly how many minutes he said it was adding to people's delays, 10, 15 minutes where he essentially kind of underplayed it. I think that, at least from what I've heard, just being out in the wider world, it seems like that is something people really remember and has stuck with people and went beyond people who are dedicated to news consumers, because that was just so enraging that they were experiencing these long waits, and it felt like he was not taking it seriously.
Dan, same question. Is there any detail that jumps out for the average person in this story? Whether it's one RFP that had no it could be the RFP that had no response. It could be the traffic situation in terms of changes to the traffic pattern on the eastbound side. Does anything jump out beyond just the simple fact that, hey, this bridge is broken and McKee was governor?
Antonia hit this one on the head. I mean, the one that sticks out that I think really broke through to everybody was the governor saying, oh, it's only a minor distraction, or I think he said 10 minutes or something to that effect. And doubling and tripling down on that before kind of walking it back and admitting that he, probably shouldn't have said that, but, he needed better communications people to tell him that was not smart and he shouldn't have defended it for so long. That's the one thing. I mean, it's obviously anecdotal, but I mean, you listen to it all the time, Bill, when you get callers to the radio station, things like that. The one thing that you kind of can hold over is, oh, only a couple of minutes, huh? And now that has broken through as every time you're in traffic, no matter where you are in the state of Rhode Island, you don't have to be on 195 where you're cringing and you maybe make the joke that say, oh, it's only a couple of minutes. Thanks, Governor. Obviously that is not fair to the governor, but I think that's the one thing that really, really broke through. To your broader point, or the broader question, I do think this is one of those issues that, and Antonia and I have done this our entire careers. We've dealt with stories like this our entire careers, where I think there are times where the journalists can very much justify, why story X or story Y is such an important story to tell. And we have to dig in on it, and we have to keep reporting on it, and we have to keep doing it. But I do think at some point, and I agree with all that. In this case, I think there's been a lot of kind of drip reporting on this that has been important. It's a good job for journalists to stay on top of it. But, we're all looking at Chartbeat. We all see what the traffic on stories looks like. I think, generally speaking, a lot of these stories do not break through to the broader public. I think even the money story of how much this is going to cost, I think people generally look at this like funny money. It's federal money. It's sort of not, until the mayor of Providence or the governor says, we have to raise your taxes because of this bridge, or fees or whatever. I don't think it quite breaks through. So we get all excited, the number is growing, hundreds of millions of dollars. At the end of the day, until it actually changes the lives of people who are, consuming the news, I think it's more of a story that reporters care about than it is something that's affecting day-to-day life. Their lives are affected. They see it every day if they're going over the bridge, and that's what they care about. And in fact, I think you could argue if the state could spend $2 billion to build it tomorrow, I think people would sign off on that in a second to just get it done.
No question. The Washington Bridge, we'll see what it looks like in 2025. Hard to imagine it goes away in terms of being a top of the hour type of story for a very long time, front page, top of the hour type of story. Some other things that are happening in Rhode Island. Again, this is one of those that I don't know is something the average person, first of all, may even know the players involved fully, but certainly in the political class, certainly in the news consuming class, and maybe beyond. The feud and the escalation of the feud between Governor McKee and Attorney General Peter Noronha. This is in some ways a social media deal, but it has now become a scenario where the Attorney General said in a Rhode Island Monthly article that he's endorsing Helena Bonanno Folks in 2026, or essentially said that. He said most recently that he's looking for a potential partner where he would run as lieutenant governor in a partnership, an informal partnership with the right gubernatorial candidate. Antonia, is this a real story or is this just fodder for politicos?
Yeah, I think it's a real story. I actually was just with some friends over the weekend who are kind of vaguely tapped into this. And we're like, so why do they have beef? What's the origin there? And I'm not sure I could fully, I think all of us could kind of give a history of all the times these feuds have popped up. But the real origin of why there's so much bad feelings, I'm not totally sure I know the answer to that. And I think it's definitely something that is going to keep playing out, especially as we get closer to an election year. I will say the fact that the Attorney General seems to have left Twitter or whatever we're calling it now and is now on Blue Sky, doesn't have so long as an audience. He's really kind of chilled out with the social media posting, which was a big part of this war, that he was kind of constantly nettling the governor and poking him and, going after him. So I don't know. I guess my question is, how long does he keep that maybe more subdued online persona?
Remains to be seen. Dan, your take on this, because you've also been critical of the Attorney General for social media behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I probably played the both-sider game on this one. I think I wrote a column, now must have been almost 2 years ago, or like 18 months ago, about how Peter Noronha was effectively using social media to get his way when it came to he wanted to hire a bunch more attorneys for his office. And he played that brilliantly, made his case, kind of took swipes at the governor, but they were measured, made his case to the legislature, and the legislature gave him what he wanted. It was it was as well executed a social media campaign by an elected official that I think we've seen in a long time in Rhode Island. And I think, I've written this and I've said it before in many different occasions. In fact, I've told the Attorney General this a bunch of times. I think he got a little addicted to the attention you get when you, when you do become a little bit of a social media hit. And we're journalists. We've all had those moments where, I said something that got people, or I wrote something that got people excited, and there's lots of retweets, and people are, either really crushing me and mad at me, or people are really happy and they're cheering on the journalism. It feels good to get that kind of attention. And I think the Attorney General got really bit by that bug and probably started to really go over the top. I wrote a column calling him a troll, and he didn't like it very much, but he has since conceded that he probably did, it probably was a bit of a stretch. I think the thing that actually knocked him off of, or made his decision to get off of social media was when he suggested on Halloween or the night before Halloween that the governor should go dressed as Pinocchio. And I know he took some heat from family members and other people who said, "Hey, General, this is a little bit too much." And pretty quickly thereafter, he got off of social media. I think it was over the top, and I think he didn't handle it particularly well. I do think it's here to stay, and here's why. Whether he's a candidate for lieutenant governor or a candidate for nothing, he's still through 2026 a statewide elected official, and one we care about, right? It's the attorney general, by definition of the office, is interesting. They're pretty present and vocal, and they can be on the radio all the time. They're talking to the print reporters. They're on TV a lot, and at least in Attorney General Norota's case. And I think whether he's a candidate or not, can be a very effective kind of attack dog for whoever Dan McKee's opponents are. And I don't just mean Helena Foulkes. Anybody that's running against Dan McKee, I think Attorney General Norota will be a factor for it. He's laid the groundwork. Now, I don't think his decisions to put out, the whole report on the ILO group that gets in the weeds, but was very scathing of the McKee administration. I don't think for a second that he put that out simply to damage McKee. I think he wanted to make it clear what he knew and what he didn't know, and sort of really spend a lot of time explaining that. But it served to hurt McKee for sure, and it will be revisited during the campaign. And the more times that he gets asked about it, the more he's not going to change his answer. He's not going to suddenly become a McKee fan in the next year or 2 years. And so I think he will be a factor whether he's on the ballot or not.
Really interesting stuff. A story that is national, obviously, but also had local implications. The Trump victory, and we saw a performance by a Republican presidential candidate that hasn't, frankly, it may be as far back as 1984 in some municipalities that the performance by the Republican presidential candidate was as strong as it was. You think about Woonsocket here in Rhode Island. Are we seeing a trend here in Rhode Island where a Republican Party that's been fledgling for as long as it has on a statewide basis, really with just a handful of candidates and kind of a bizarre leadership direction, is this the beginning of something like a new day for Republicans? What's your take on that, Antonia, as you've been covering political scene-wise?
Yeah, that's something I'm really curious to see if that does translate any bump for them down the line, because you do see a place like Woonsocket, yes, it flipped for Trump for the first time in however many decades, but you go down the ballot and you have Democrats winning. Johnston has been that way for a long time. And I thought it was interesting this year in Johnston, you had a state representative who essentially lost their primary to a progressive, Kelsey Coletta, who then in the general lost to the Republican. In other words, basically saying people there would rather go for who have been Democratic for a very long time while electing Trump. There's in fact an entire book written about this. I think Dan wrote about at one point, Trump's Democrats. But yeah, so the fact that they flip Republican in this instance, you just have to wonder how many times that's going to happen in future. But I think the problem is that the Republican Party hasn't really been able to recruit strong candidates for a very long time, in part because they don't win elections. So there's no reason to run as a Republican if you could run as a Democrat who is an anti-abortion, pro-gun Democrat. I mean, there's been very little incentive for people to do that. So you have to really see those incentives change.
Is this the beginning of the red wave in Rhode Island, Dan?
Not a chance. I don't see it for all the reasons why Antonia just pointed out. The Republican Party in the state, I feel like every other year we all do stories on like, is this the time where there's going to be a Republican wave, or the Republicans? I remember going back, God, it must have been 2011 or 2012 when the Providence Phoenix still existed. And a colleague now of mine at the Globe, David Scharfenberg, wrote this big front page story about how the Republicans were using this new voter ID or voter system, like voter file system that was going to revolutionize the way that they found voters, and they were going to win all these seats. And I remember behind the scenes, I was sort of a young reporter, probably a little bit gullible to be honest, and had a bunch of Republicans who were in office tell me, oh, we're going to pick up all these seats. In fact, I think they lost seats in 2012, which makes sense because you had President Obama at the time on the ballot against Mitt Romney. There's a couple of things that I do think are worth keeping an eye on. The Democratic Party's kind of system nationally has forever, for a very long time, has been to really run up the scores in urban spots in cities. So I always hear, we got to win big in Philly, we got to win big in Detroit or Milwaukee. And it is not a very healthy system to have to win 80-20 in those communities, right? They still won by landslides in a lot of cities, including places like Providence. But yes, the Republicans made some inroads. And so, when you win 60-40 instead of, by a much larger number, you got to go out and win the suburbs sometimes. You got to go win, rural areas, or at least be more competitive in rural areas. And I think the party, this is not by any means, the most breaking news analysis here, they take for granted Black and brown voters way too much. They just assume that they're always going to vote for us, because don't you see what the president, or what Donald Trump has said, and what he thinks, and Project 2025 and all these things that I think, to the point what we were talking about before in the Washington Bridge, I'm not sure everybody consumed all of that media. I think they tuned it out in a lot of ways. And also, I would say the other thing that's always been on my mind in this, I haven't heard it entirely defined in the national, the national coverage of these elections, or this year's election. But with Donald Trump, this is the third time he was on the ballot, over the last 12 years, right? He is the most voted for presidential candidate in the history of our country. It has become very normal to vote for Donald Trump. People understand it. They recognize him. It used to be everyone said 2016 was, they voted for a reality star, and all they knew about him was that he was a reality star. That may have been true. But you know what? He's now been the centerpiece of American politics for 12 years. I think people got a little more comfortable. I think they probably kind of resisted or pushed back against the big alarming threats, because they haven't seen massive change since Donald Trump entered the political sphere, if you will. And so I think people got a little bit more comfortable and were willing to take that chance. Now, will it come back to bite them? I think that's the thing we're all focused on for the next couple of years, and we'll see how it goes. But I think it was, in some ways, even use a silly analogy or locally, there have been people who run for office constantly year after year in Rhode Island. The one that comes to mind most is Bob Healy for years, or lieutenant governor, ran for governor, got close, in fact, against Gina Raimondo. As people see you on the ballot more, as people hear your name more, they do become a little bit more accepting and comfortable with you. And I think that was part of the argument for Donald Trump this time around.
So I turn to each of you now. Antonia, some of the stuff, both of you have had, I think, amazing years. And I also take this moment to say that I'm so grateful for the fact that we have the Providence Journal, and not only a Providence Journal, but a Providence Journal staffed by an array of veteran and Gen, as they would say, reporters, and also the Boston Globe Rhode Island Bureau, which has expanded. And it's so nice. It's such a treat, and it's such an important and frankly unusual scenario that we have two statewide regional powerhouses in news that do different things. Obviously, there's some overlap, but I just want to put it out there that I'm grateful for it. I think we're all better when there's competition. And I also think that you've differentiated yourselves enough where everybody wins as a result of the existence of a strong Providence Journal and a strong Boston Globe Rhode Island. So that's that. I'll now turn it over to you, Antonia. Some of the biggest stories that you've covered this year are some of the most interesting things you've covered, of which there are many.
Ooh, okay. I don't know about myself personally, but I will say a couple of big things we didn't mention that just the Journal has covered in general that I think are pretty big and that I think are worth watching in the coming year would be the potential Hasbro move to Boston, what's going to happen with that. Also recently, the future of the Providence Place Mall being very much in question. One thing I know Dan and his colleagues have covered a lot is Providence schools and the funding there and what that is going to mean for people who live in Providence, who are taxpayers in the coming year. And also the power battle in the state Senate and the questions about Senate President Ruggiere's future, given all the health issues he's had and kind of this sort of coup attempt from a more progressive side of the party to seize power did not work out. So what are going to be the ramifications of that, and how does that all shake up in the coming year?
Yeah, plus the continuation of vanity plates, which is something that
that's always the biggest story. Yeah,
probably the biggest story ever, if there was such a thing. And just kind of building off of that thought, just on Hasbro, what an interesting scenario to look at, because there's so many things at play there. I mean, there's Pawtucket, obviously. There's this statewide ecosystem and appetite for an international firm to do business in Rhode Island. And there's the evolution of a business like Hasbro from a manufacturing-oriented business to now partially manufacturing and largely new media. And you wonder, is that a bellwether for where we're trending in terms of major firms, and particularly major firms that have tentacles or are altogether based in that sort of new media digital realm? With the Innovation District in Providence, in addition to Meds and Eds, really the other pillar of that should be exactly what Hasbro does. So the fact that it doesn't look like they're going there, I think that's a huge story that we have to, hey, are we for real? Or do we want to be the creative capital? Do we want to be something that is unique on a global scale beyond just the blue economy and beyond the Meds and Eds? So I think that's the big takeaway, and it is a major story, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, Providence has done a nice job, and Providence in the state in general has done a really nice job of branding when it comes to the Innovation District down there, which is we're in a building right on Dyer Street, which is sort of the center of the 195 redevelopment district. Done a really good job of branding it, and they've had some wins. I think the building that we're in, the Cambridge Innovation Center, has a lot of interesting companies in it. There's a lot of good things going on there. Obviously, we're seeing the life sciences at least begin to take off with the building their building down there. But to your point, Bill, I mean, I still would like to see more out of it. The best thing about that district right now is a lot of green space and a bridge and a beer garden that's there every day during the summer. And while I love those things, I take my kid to the beer garden probably way more often than I should. That's not exactly creating a ton of jobs. It's not exactly really boosting that innovation. Those innovation goals, or the life sciences goals, quite frankly, that our leaders have had for that land. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on. To your point, the 195 Commission has kind of put out a pitch to Hasbro to build right down there, right where the famed tower was supposed to be built, the residential tower. And it doesn't look like that is going to be something that happens. They put out a good idea. It was cute. It was nice, and it got some attention. But it doesn't look like that's going to be a kind of a serious or something that is seriously considered by Hasbro. And so I think it is a challenge. At the same time, for everything you said, look, Hasbro is a company that has evolved and changed dramatically since it was doing just Mr. Potato Head. And I think Boston has an interesting pitch. They want to be kind of the toy capital. You've got Lego, moving in there. You've got a couple of different companies that sort of they think can be like Hasbro adjacent, and so it makes sense for Hasbro to potentially consider moving there. And the big question for Hasbro is going to be, what do these tariffs look like in the new administration, and does that affect potentially their move? Are they going to want to save on costs? Maybe they deal with staying in Newport Avenue for a couple more years, and so I'm going to be keeping an eye on that certainly in the new year.
Any other major stories that from this past year that stick out to you, Dan?
Yeah, Antonia hit all the big ones. I think that Providence school story is one that's going to not go away for a lot of reasons. The finances of it, have created a challenge for the city of Providence. Now, I've written this, and I feel very strongly that this is righting a wrong that the city of Providence and multiple administrations have committed for a really long time. And so, yes, raising taxes on property owners makes some level of sense to be able to pay their fair share for the school system. That's one element of it. The other factors, though, that come into mind is like, what are we getting for all this money, right? The school system is still really in disarray. This takeover, which is still years from ending, at least as we talk today, has not worked out even remotely close to the way the Raimondo administration, but the current education commissioner, Angelica Infante-Green, really suggested it would. And I don't think we're going to have very much to show for it by 2027, 2028. The biggest win is going to be more funding. That is a win. There's no question about it. But that is not what was promised back in 2019 when this takeover started.
All great stuff. And of course, you can find great Rhode Island stories all the time, anytime at providencejournal.com. Actually, it's projo.com. And the Boston Globe.com, or is it just Boston? I'm riffing here, and I've just butchered two
Globe.com/RI, Bill.
Thank you. Okay. So I've got it all in my presets, my favorites. And of course, ripodcast.com as well. Thanks both of you again for hopping on today. And I think there are just so many stories that we could have talked about, but hey, we'll have to do it again next year. We'll see how it all plays out.
Bill, you touched on this a second ago, but I want to also just say, one, I think Antonia and I are both very thankful for you and for the work that you do, because you bring, most importantly, I think just a refreshing sense of energy to what you do and to the various platforms that you're able to kind of distribute your content on. And, I'd be remiss. The only thing I don't like about Antonia is that she doesn't work with me. So I think one of the best journalists in the market, and so it's really nice to be on this call with you guys, and it's an honor. So thanks, guys.
It is, yeah. And I will say, going to what Bill was saying earlier also about how it's great to have such a healthy media ecosystem here, having all of us, I think, for some of these stories, the bridge, the cyber attack, whatever it is, having more reporters and more people to frankly nag these people and nag decision makers and the people in charge and ask questions. I just think it's a good thing. I mean, we're better off with more people doing that and more people asking questions and more people scrutinizing what's happening. So definitely very grateful for both of you for doing that day in and day out.
Let me tell you about my friends at Half Street Group. They bring a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. And you can join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Our news desert is getting bigger and drier. Poignant words from Wayne Cabot as he was signing off WCBS New York for the final time. The news radio icon going off the air. And hey, we try to do our part every day here at Bartholomew Town, ripodcast.com. And part of our sustainability depends on our listeners. And if you would like to support the independent journalism that we produce, visit patreon.com/Bartholomew Town, or just click the support link wherever you're listening. Hey, thanks for stopping by Bartholomew Town. For more content, follow me on Instagram at Bill Bartholomew.